In the wealthiest nation on earth, millions of working-class Americans are struggling to make ends meet. Think about that for a second. Wealthiest nation on earth. A phrase so often repeated, it's lost all meaning. Yet we have people working their asses off, playing by the rules and still struggling to afford basic necessities. It's like winning a lifetime supply of caviar, but only being able to afford the crackers to eat it with. Wages for typical workers have barely budged over decades. Even as the cost of living has surged, housing costs more, healthcare costs more, even decent guacamole costs more. It's enough to make you want to live in a van, if you could afford the rent on a parking space. Today, we'll break down 5 key economic challenges facing American workers, and look at the data behind them. We'll also clarify when these economic problems began to understand how many current challenges were set in motion before the Biden administration. Because, let's be clear, this isn't about pointing fingers at one party or president, this is about systemic issues that have been festering for decades. Let's dive in. Let's talk about wages, shall we? That magical sum of money that appears in your bank account every 2 weeks only to vanish faster than a politician's promise during an election year. The thing is, for the average American worker, wages have barely budged in decades. We're talking glacial pace here, folks. Imagine a sloth in a salary negotiation. That's how much movement we're seeing. Meanwhile, the cost of everything from housing to healthcare to that artisanal bread you pretend to like has skyrocketed. You know that feeling when you order takeout and it costs twice as much as you remember? That's inflation, baby. And it's been quietly picking our collective pockets for years. So you're probably thinking, but Robert, hasn't productivity increased? Aren't we, as a nation, producing more goods and services than ever before? And you'd be right. We are a nation of incredibly productive, overworked, and under-caffeinated individuals. But here's the kicker. Those productivity gains haven't translated into fatter paychecks for the average worker. Instead, they've been funneled upwards, like a reverse chocolate fountain of wealth, leaving most of us with a few measly sprinkles while the folks at the top get a full-body chocolate immersion. This isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, this is about real families struggling to keep their heads above water. It's about parents working multiple jobs, about choosing between paying rent or buying groceries, about the crushing weight of economic anxiety that keeps millions of Americans awake at night. This is about the erosion of the American dream, the idea that if you work hard and play by the rules, you can build a better life for yourself and your children. That dream, my friends, is starting to feel more like a fantasy for far too many. Okay, let's talk about something truly absurd. The ever-widening chasm between CEO pay and average worker pay. We're not talking about a gap here, folks. We're talking about a yawning abyss so vast it could swallow the Grand Canyon whole. Remember that chocolate fountain of wealth we mentioned earlier? Well, CEOs are basically bathing in it, Scrooge McDuck style, while the rest of us are fighting over the drips. In the 1960s, the average CEO made about 20 times more than their average worker. A different time, sure, but still a considerable gap. Fast forward to today, and that ratio has exploded to over 350 times. You could drive a fleet of gold-plated monster trucks through that gap, and you'd still have room for a yacht or two. It's obscene, it's unsustainable, and it's a slap in the face to every hardworking American who's struggling to make ends meet. Now, some might argue that CEOs deserve their astronomical salaries because they're the job creators, the risk takers, the visionaries. And to that, I say, oh, bless your naive little heart, because last I checked, it takes a lot more than a CEO's vision to keep a company afloat. It takes the sweat, the dedication, and the sheer hard work of every single employee, from the factory floor to the customer service line. This isn't about demonizing success or advocating for some sort of communist utopia where everyone earns the same wage regardless of their contribution. It's about fairness, folks. It's about ensuring that the people who are creating the wealth, the ones showing up day in and day out, putting in the hours and keeping the wheels turning, are rewarded fairly for their labor. It's about recognizing that a healthy economy requires a thriving middle class, not just a handful of obscenely wealthy individuals at the top. All right, let's talk tariffs. Not the most exciting topic, I know, but trust me, this is important. Imagine a trade war as a food fight, but instead of food, it's your economic well-being being tossed around. And surprise, surprise, it's the average American worker who ends up wearing most of the mess. Now, the Trump administration might have championed tariffs as a way to make America great again, but in reality, they were about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. Sure, they might have scored a few political points and sounded tough, but in the real world, they just ended up hurting American businesses and consumers. See, when you slap tariffs on goods from other countries, those countries tend to retaliate with tariffs of their own. It's kind of like that moment in a playground argument when someone yells, "I'm rubber, you're glue, whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you." Except in this case, everyone gets covered in metaphorical glue. Prices for consumers go up, demand for American products goes down, and businesses are forced to make tough choices like cutting jobs or closing factories. And who do you think bears the brunt of those consequences? You guessed it, the average worker. The ones whose jobs are shipped overseas, whose wages stagnate, and who are left footing the bill for this economic game of chicken. The trade war, my friends, was a self-inflicted wound, and the scars are still visible on our economy today. College, the best 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years of your life, or so they say. A time for intellectual exploration, personal growth, and racking up enough debt to make a small country blush, because let's face it, folks, the cost of college has spiraled so far out of control, it's practically achieved orbit. We're not just talking about tuition here, although that's bad enough. We're talking about housing, textbooks, meal plans, and a whole host of other fees that seem to materialize out of thin air, like administrative costs for a department that teaches students how to breathe. The numbers are staggering. According to, a relevant source, the average cost of tuition and fees at a public 4-year college has increased by over, say, a huge percentage since, a certain year. That's faster than the speed of light, or at least faster than the average graduate's ability to pay off their student loans. This astronomical cost is putting an incredible strain on working families, forcing them to make impossible choices. Mortgage the house or send their kid to college? Retirement savings or a degree in philosophy? It's a lose-lose situation, and it's time we acknowledge the elephant in the lecture hall. The college affordability crisis is real. It's impacting millions of Americans, and it's time we found a solution. Speaking of student loans, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the albatross around the necks of millions of American student loan debt. We're talking about a staggering $1.7 trillion in outstanding debt, more than the GDP of many small countries. That's enough to buy a small planet, or at least a really nice space station. This isn't just about irresponsible spending or avocado toast, folks. This is about a generation saddled with so much debt, they're delaying major life milestones. Buying a home, getting married, having children, or even investing in a decent retirement plan. They're trapped in a cycle of debt, with interest rates higher than a giraffe's eye and fewer options than a vegan at a steakhouse. The student loan crisis is a complex issue with no easy solutions, but one thing's for sure, we can't just keep burying our heads in the sand and pretending it doesn't exist. We need to have a serious conversation about college affordability, about responsible lending practices, and about finding ways to alleviate the burden on borrowers. Because here's the thing, when an entire generation is crippled by debt, it doesn't just hurt them, it hurts all of us. It stifles economic growth, it discourages innovation, and it undermines the very fabric of our society. It's time we stopped treating student loan debt like an individual problem and started addressing it like the national crisis it truly is. We've covered a lot: stagnant wages, soaring CEO pay, trade war shocks, crippling college costs, and overwhelming student debt. It can feel overwhelming, like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. But here's the thing, despair is a luxury we can't afford. Because the truth is, these issues are interconnected. They're symptoms of a system that's been rigged in favor of the wealthy and powerful for far too long. These challenges are interlinked and decades in the making, with roots in long-term trends and policies before the current administration. But that doesn't mean we're powerless to change course. We need to demand better from our elected officials. We need to hold corporations accountable. And we need to fight for economic policies that prioritize the needs of working families. The path forward requires economic policies that prioritize workers and foster fairness, so that the American dream remains within reach for all. We need to invest in education, rebuild our infrastructure, and create an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the very top. Ensuring economic fairness for workers isn't just about politics. It's about renewing the promise of opportunity in America. And that's something we all have a stake in.